Hey everyone, Jason here from campswithfriends.com. We are a summer camp and enrichment program database and business. And today we're going to be talking to Elizabeth from Prep for Success. Elizabeth, why don't you start with telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, basically, I teach, my specialty is English reading and writing. Basically, I can't teach a child to read. I'm not trained in teaching phonics, but once they can read, I teach them all the way on up through even graduate school, like a master's degree in chemistry. I help with the theses, things like that. So if basically once a person can read, if it has to do with reading and writing, I can help you with.
Oh, that's really great. What
Yeah.
what sparked your interest in, or how did you get into this? Like just a brief sort of history of Elizabeth and her career.
Well, I always suspected that I wouldn't do well in a proper kind of job. So, and then I decided to go to graduate school in English because my one skill is reading stories. And so I planned to teach at the university level at first,
Hmm.
but this was in the early 1990s, and just when colleges started shifting away from hiring full-time faculty, especially in the liberal arts and the humanities. And so you could only get a job like one course at a time, and they'd pay you, if you're lucky, $1,500, and then you're out of work in 15 weeks. And it's no way to raise a family. And so eventually, when I needed to work full time, I worked in a private high school in Newark, and then I got certified to teach in New Jersey. But by the time I got certified, I was working in a kind of scary public school, and I was hospitalized twice, had 9 rotated discs, 2 concussions, and the
Oh
kid who
no.
stole my computer got himself shot in the head. So after that, I decided to go into
Wow.
tutoring. Yeah, it was pretty horrible. I
Wow.
kept getting hurt, and and like I said, a boy who I never laid eyes on stole my laptop one day. School had him on 3 video cameras, and they never caught. Or they caught him, but they didn't get my laptop back. I had to buy a new one. And
Gosh.
about 2 months later, he got out of jail, and his parents agreed that they would reimburse me for the price of the computer. And then he got killed in some kind of incident one night. And that was, it was the whole thing was just horrible. So,
Wow.
tutoring got me to students where I didn't really have to worry about my safety.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to think that my workplace was dangerous. And best of all, I got to work again with kids who wanted to learn instead of kids who I had to fight to let me teach them, because
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily great at that part. Because what I do, what I teach, the English language, it's so basic that if you honestly don't think you need to know it, we're going to have a hard time having a conversation. So, and so then with the tutoring, it's just wonderful because I get to work with kids of all different ages. It's never boring. And, when I have a long-term student, I get to see them grow. A little girl I started with several years ago, her father just called me because she won a fencing championship at the county level,
Wow.
and, I remember when she was just getting started and she had a terrible back injury and all this stuff. And now she really won something. It's just so
Wow.
neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So remind us quickly where in the country are you?
When I started my business, I was in central New Jersey, but now I live in upstate New York,
Okay.
but in Albany, New York. But my business is nationwide.
Okay.
I've had students even internationally. Last year, I got to work with a kid in Bolivia and someone in Ecuador. I've worked with a kid in Thailand. It's fun.
Okay, so
And
you
I,
don't just have kids coming to you. What sort of do you use Zoom? What do you use to
everything, yeah, basically I'm on Zoom. If somebody's local and they want to meet in person, we can meet in a public place or something like that. But honestly, we don't need to be in the same room because it's all document based, text based stuff.
or even in the same country?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
That's I mean that's a crazy start to your career. You know, it's brought you here, obviously, but wow, that's I didn't even know about that, so it's news for me as well, and just a crazy
Yeah, no,
story.
it's when I say it like that, it's a horror story. It was
Yeah.
just like, and then the other piece was I finally worked out that if you have a PhD, they actually don't want to hire you because they have to pay you more. I was advised to take my doctorate off my job applications for teaching jobs, and I'm sorry, I really couldn't bring myself to do that.
Oh, so you're
So
actually a
that was,
doctor in
yeah, I have a
English.
doctorate. Yeah, a PhD in English literature.
It's great.
And so, once the university career didn't pan out and the public school teaching seemed unsuccessful, um, this seemed to be the best way to do something useful.
Yeah.
Because I really like working with the kids. The kids are always great. I never have a problem with my students, even when students hate what I do. And, they're only working with me because they're doing poorly in the subject. It's not
Yeah.
like they like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even so, to make it fun and make them engaged and get them to really do it is so rewarding.
Do you ever have any kind of struggles that you face with the kids with, with a majority of it being online? Do you have any kind of struggles keeping them engaged, and if so, sort of how do you overcome that?
Usually not, because, so for example, for the younger kids, I always almost always use a vocabulary curriculum. The way you learn vocabulary is you want to interact with it actively. Kids who just read it over on the page, they're not going to learn anything. They're not going to remember. But so what I do is instead of me checking it in a book the way I might in a classroom, I have them read their answers back to me. Guess what? They're saying what the words mean that whole time. So we're studying for the quiz while we review the lesson.
Hmm.
And then most of them, I make my quizzes as hard as I can, but most of them get to where they get one or two wrong.
Yeah.
And so there's, because I've studied the science of how kids learn and how kids remember words and things like that. And so, that interactive stuff is really important.
Yeah.
And so I in fact use the Zoom to make it in a way more interactive. And when we work on writing, we're sharing the document on Google Docs.
Uh-huh.
And so I can, take kids who have trouble writing, I like walk them through the thinking process. So you go through the steps and, ideally then they can memorize it and do it on their own,
Yeah. I was
so that they
actually,
shouldn't.
yeah, I know. Sorry about that. I know the other day we had spoken about my daughter Scarlett, who is dyslexic, and
Right.
she has her sort of challenges is finding the place in her brain where the information is stored and going to go and get it, right? So it takes her a second to answer complex questions and all that kind of thing. Um, and so we obviously want her to be more successful in reading, and we also want her to be more successful in writing. For a 10-year-old, or sorry, 11-year-old girl, what sort of thing could you do to help her?
I'm not trained in special ed, so I don't know techniques like that. But what I do is I provide the extra time in a supportive environment. And then whatever the struggle is, we look for ways to work around it to remember something. I do a lot with mnemonics, ways that you can memorize stuff,
Hmm.
so that way there's a clue there for you. And I know that when I did learn about what it's like to have one of these learning disabilities, and understanding that, the image that was given to me for a kid like your daughter is that the knowledge is there, but it's in a locked filing cabinet and you have to find the key. So
Yeah.
the key is a word bank. And so then the words are there. So then you don't have to dredge it up. And that kind of insight, I think, makes me a better teacher for all kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we all have stuff coming at us all the time, and sometimes we struggle to remember things. So if you think of a learning disability like your daughter's as something that everybody struggles with to a greater or lesser degree, then you say, okay, so this is the struggle, and what can we do to solve this problem? And when I get the kids helping and reduce their anxiety levels, they often do quite well.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's just about practice at the end of the day, right? Like these kids, they just need to
Mhm.
practice and keep going over it and not sit on electronics too long where they don't have to use their brain much, right?
Well, the blog I just published, I posted it on Camps with Friends also. It's called Turn on Your Child's Brain.
Yeah,
And it's basically a plea to get kids off screens. And, this is the brain science. None of it is active because one of the problems I struggle with is kids can't think. They can't come up with ideas that they can talk about.
yep,
And I think that the passivity, even like if you're playing a game, all the options have been thought of for you.
yep,
You don't get to think outside the box at all. And I think with kids who learn differently or have slightly different wiring, when they're struggling to keep up, like in a classroom, it gets to be a very stressful experience. But the advantage of working one-on-one is if the kid is getting stressed out, we can calm down, we can look at it another way, we can make some jokes, and we can sort of normalize the struggle so they don't feel like there's something wrong with them.
yeah, yeah,
And that's really part of it. Kids get so stigmatized and they see it's easier for other people. And so the more you can reposition that and say, this is how, okay, and, things like that. So I just try to be very common sense and very approachable about it and open to suggestions and ideas and trying different ways.
great. For these kinds of scenarios where so it's uh, I'm guessing your lessons are probably somewhere around 40-45 minutes to an hour. Is that correct?
Usually an hour, but there's a couple of kids I work with where we do 1 or 2 half-hour sessions a week.
What do you typically
Um,
teach this kind of thing?
okay, so basically the grade school curriculum I prefer is vocabulary, grammar, or lately I've been tending towards analogies. This is to this, apples are to oranges, as cucumbers are to tomatoes, vegetables to fruits, or synonyms or antonyms or different relationships. And it's great because it encourages that kind of critical thinking of making associations. And I've been thinking about how much of English language instruction is about relationships. Because when I teach SAT, a big thing on the new SAT is transition words. It's like, yeah, that's about a relationship. You have to stop and figure out the relationships. And so that encourages the kind of more active thinking that I like. And then we read books together and I try and let the kid have some, input into what we read. So on a regular week, I could be talking about 5 or 6 different novels with kids, all different grade levels. For little ones, I start with like the Oz books,
Okay.
because first of all, they're harder than many kids are exposed to at those levels today. So I always try and sort of pitch it a little hard. And so that way they're being challenged. I don't want to read a book with you that you could totally read on your own. That's not, you don't need me for that. Let me make it harder. And so the Oz books throw all kinds of vocabulary at kids
Uh-huh.
and they get to learn it. And, there's none of the violence and wham bam stuff that they get in games and videos. And even today's kids' books, they tend to be lots of running around kinds of stuff. These are calmer. And so it's a different way, and so I start with those and then other childhood classics. Um, and then I try to upgrade, when I do modern stuff, again, I try and make it stuff that's interesting, that's challenging, books that have won awards, and very much books that people talk about. It's really important to get the references. If you want to feel like an insider, you want to get what people are talking about. I used to study TV shows for the same reason because I wasn't allowed to watch. So
Oh.
I would crib, and that way I would know what people were talking about. So, I whenever I can, I make sure they read the Oz book, at least one Oz book. I make sure they read at least one Harry Potter book. So they know the names and they know the jokes and they know the references and, other books like that.
Yep.
So does that make sense? I'm going on a lot.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
no, you're totally fine. No, that's yeah, yeah, it's I mean you have to push kids, right? You have to push them hard, otherwise they're never gonna learn. Um
Yeah. But
can you
one
ex
thing
no go,
sorry, I was going to say sometimes we go like, usually my thing is we go about 3 chapters a week and answer questions. But then I get a kid who one week we start him on Harry Potter and he's in second grade, I think. And the next week he's on the fourth book.
Oh, wow.
And those kids are like, ooh, they're the best.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that doesn't happen very often. And when it does, I have to struggle to keep up.
Yep. Yep. So one of the questions I prepared for you, can you explain executive functioning and its importance?
As best as I understand it, basically it's the ability to organize yourself, prioritize your tasks and your time so that you're getting started on things properly.
Okay.
I think it's a term for basic organizational skills mostly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because whenever you get a term, you want to unpack it because people don't change. It's just the ways that we think about people change.
Hmm.
You know, kids who now have learning disabilities were once just called bad at school and channeled into other things. And now we live in a place where, you can't just work with your hands. You have to be able to do other things. And so for some people, that's going to be more challenging,
Yep.
and so we have all these different kinds of things. And so, but I mean, disorganized kids, executive functioning, gee, um, were you always perfectly organized?
I don't think I'm still not very organized.
No, we all, well, the first time I ever had a big project, my mother sat me down and she's like, this is how you do it. You go step by step by step.
Yep.
And so, when I work with kids who have trouble with that, I think one of the real trouble is getting them to where they can work on it without the coaching,
Hmm.
to get them to where they're confident enough that they can sit there and follow their own directions. If you teach them to go methodically through it, teach them how to take notes so they don't have to go through a pile of websites again to find what they're wanting. You teach them how to take notes so it minimizes the shuffling around. You teach them how to plan out their ideas in bullet points so they're not also trying to write sentences at the same time. And once you've got all your ideas worked out, then it's pretty easy to turn them all into sentences because you've basically done all the work already.
Yep.
And so what I try and do when I coach kids in writing is to get them to do the brainstorming at least with me, in the class. And then for the ones who can, go home and write a draft.
Yep.
And then for the ones who can't, the next week we work on the thesis paragraph, and the next week, and I'm always pushing them to see what they can do on their own. And one of the best things I like about teaching online is I no longer have to worry about somebody's parent wandering through while we're sitting in silence, because I have to give the kid time to think
Yep.
and to struggle with that process of putting the words on the page. And if I make it any easier for them, then they just write down what I said.
Yep.
So I have to sit there in silence. And, I always used to hate it at people's houses because, like, it looks like we're not doing anything.
Uh-huh.
Thinking is a quiet process sometimes. So
That's
I
really
like
great.
the Zoom calls because I can kind of bop in and out and supervise, but I'm not staring at the screen biting my tongue,
Yep.
because I just want you to say it already. So, it helps me be nicer to my students, I feel like.
Yeah, that's really great. That's really great. Well, Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining today and answering my questions. And um, what we're here to do is to get your name out there and to potentially get you
Sure.
a few more students from around the country, whether it be locally or wherever. And where can people where can parents find more information about you?
Okay, my website is www.elizabethbreau.net. And my email is elizabeth.breau, B as in boy, REAU @gmail.
Do you have any social media channels?
Um, Not channels per se, but I post on Alignable and LinkedIn and Facebook in a
Okay.
number of different groups and on my pages.
Excellent, excellent. And now, of course, on Camps with Friends as well. People can find you on
Yes,
Camps with Friends.
yes, and I will be posting, putting the blog up there as well.
That's
So
really
yeah,
great. And
I'd love
yeah,
to hear from anybody. I'm always interested.
Excellent.
and
Excellent.
getting new students and working with more kids.
Yeah, we're definitely going to do our best to get your name out there onto our database. We have thousands of parents searching our website all the time, so that's always really, really great. And we're going to be adding this video to YouTube and to our website and our blog as well. So we're going to be doing our best to get your name out there. And
Wonderful, thank you.
yeah, well, hang around after I stop. I'm going to click stop recording here in just a second, and then we can just finish up the chat after that. But thanks again. Is there anything else you want to leave parents with?
Not really. Just, I think basically buy your children lots of books and limit their screen time. And that's the best thing you can do for their development. Albert Einstein said that if you want smart children, you should read them fairy tales. And if you want them to be smarter, you should read them more fairy tales.
That's great.
So that's what I want parents to think about today.
Great.
Okay.
That's an awesome
All
message.
right.
All right. I'm going to
Sure.
start recording. Thanks very much, and we'll chat after this.
Okay.